Ladies and gentlemen, Robby Robinson, all to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for listening to me on empty stomachs. Namrata, I too would like to work with you, but after having watched you since Thursday, I have no doubt who would be in charge. I want to thank Gabby for agreeing to have this session be off the record. Forget about that. Thank you all. I should say that the trailer that you just watched raises my heart rate. And as you all know, journalism is kind of boring. When the trailer came out, which was 3 months before the film, can you hear me? Okay. When the trailer came out, the Newsweek magazine film critic wrote that the trailer was more explosive than any movie that actually had an explosion. Thank you for the introduction, and I'm not sure this is working. You can't hear me. From what we've seen tonight, and particularly seen Kunda, the applause should be really for the organizers of this wonderful conference, for the opportunity that it's given all of us to be together, for the opportunity it's given us to be in this wonderful country, even if we never see that mountain. On a personal note, I know a little about Nepal from my sister, Sheila Robinson. She worked here during the 1980s and 1990s, helping establish healthcare facilities in rural areas as part of a Canadian health organization partnership with the Institute of Medicine at Triphuvan University. And through Sheila, I've gotten to meet her friend, John Sanday, who's here tonight. For those of you who may not know him, John is a British architect who's lived here for 4 decades. John is renowned throughout Asia for his work in restoring ancient temples, particularly in Cambodia and here in Nepal. He has been knighted by Queen Elizabeth, although I suspect he wouldn't take kindly to being called Sir. Coincidentally, through Namrata, I've spent time with Aruna Upreti. Many of you here know her. She is a physician who fought, often with few allies, for 14 years to make abortion legal in Nepal. In 2002, she prevailed. She is also this country's most vocal advocate for getting rid of the sex trafficking. And it turns out she and John are longtime friends. And I want to thank both of you for being here tonight. Tom McCarthy, who made the film Spotlight, is a wonderful filmmaker. The next time you are contemplating an investigation that might take several months, I implore you, call me first. I'll put you in touch with Tom, and he'll do the whole investigation for you in 2 hours and 8 minutes. And if you need extra reporting help, I can arrange for you to get Rachel McAdams and Mark Ruffalo. Don't ask for Michael Keaton. As an editor, he's a colossal pain in the ass. Now, to the matter at hand, what we do. You can tell from looking at me, even those of you in the back of the room, that I've had a very long career. For me, and I suspect for most of you, the circumstances that ignited our passion for journalism began when we were quite young. My reporting career at the Boston Globe began 44 years ago when they hired me as a college intern reporter. But I believe it began when I was 11 years old. At about 5 every morning, I got on my bicycle and I pedaled 3 blocks. In doing so, I set a course for a lifetime. There, under a street lamp, there was a bundle of Boston newspapers ready for me to deliver. But the first thing I did every morning, even in winter, was sit on the curb and read the paper before I dropped a copy on a single doorstep. I read the morning paper with wonder because it empowered me. I thought of myself at age 11 as the first person in my community who knew what the news was. Back then, I began to dream. I've now spent my entire adult life astride that bicycle. Like you, I awaken every day, still, eager to be the first to find out what is happening. Like you, I am always trying to find out what others cannot. Like you, I'm forever asking questions when I see something out of the ordinary. Like you, I've always been among the loudest voices demanding to know what is really behind those official explanations that we get. Like you, I am constantly leaking out stories that the people and institutions we cover do not want us to know about. Like you, I know for a certainty that democracy cannot function effectively without reporters posted as sentries for the public, and without investigative reporters shining a light into life's darkest corners. On Thursday, I had an email exchange with a friend who asked me, "What the hell are you doing in Nepal?" A good question. I would have made the trip just to meet Martha Mendoza and Esther Toussaint, who, as I think you all know, are half of the Pulitzer Prize-winning team from the AP that did what is some of the best investigative reporting in memory. When I met them Thursday evening, I even got a little choked up as I tried to explain how much I admire their work and the courage it took to do it. So to meet them, and to meet so many of you, and to be carried along by your enthusiasm for investigative reporting made the 7,500-mile trip so worthwhile. Obviously, I am here because the Spotlight team, the real one, was blessed with great good fortune. We stumbled almost by accident upon a story of enormous importance, a story that plunged the Catholic Church into its gravest crisis in centuries. And then several years later, along came 2 Hollywood producers who wanted to make a movie about what we did. Of course, we thought they were nuts. Some of us actually tried to talk them out of it. If you don't think that's luck, let me take you on a little deeper dive. In the film, as in real life, the Globe in 2001 got a new editor. On his very first day, Marty Barron asked the Spotlight team to do an investigation of one priest who had been sued by 84 victims. Marty's charge to me was simple. See if you can find out what the cardinals and bishops knew about his abuse of children. That was it. Investigate one priest. If we had done that story, I'd be home tonight and you'd have a much better speaker. But here's what happened. We began our investigation immediately, frightened that we might fail the new boss. Anyone who's ever had a demanding new boss knows what I mean. So rather than make calls about the one priest, we took the vacuum cleaner approach. We called everyone we could think of who knew anything about the sexual abuse of children. And because we did that, we learned within a week that the one priest was the tip of a large iceberg, that the church had covered up and facilitated the sexual crimes of perhaps a dozen priests. That surely changed the scope of the story. My name is Walter Robinson. In case you can't read that, thank you. Anyway, I'm sorry. Eventually, a dozen priests turned out to be 87 priests, and then 110 priests, and then 135, and then 175, and finally, just in Boston, 249 priests. 10.75% of all the priests over 50 years sexually abused children in Boston. Fear of the boss, I now believe, is journalism's most noble impulse. One reason journalists like the film is because it feels authentic. Clueless reporters running into each other in the dark, trying to figure out whether there is a story, then trying to determine its dimensions, then being dumbstruck to learn that the story is much different and much bigger than they could have imagined. Finally, arguing over whether to jam the story into the paper or hold off and do more reporting. If that has a ring of familiarity, it is because that happens pretty often in newsrooms all over the world. The brilliance of this film is not just that it faithfully portrays journalism as it is actually done, warts and all, and at warp speed, I should say, but Tom McCarthy also found an ingenious way through the eyes of the reporters to allow all of us to confront the horrors that befell countless children, and to do so without having to avert our eyes. As a result, the film has become a powerful megaphone for the survivors of sexual abuse in their battle to force the Catholic Church to change its ways. And it has given many more victims the courage to come forward. Spotlight, the movie, opened in the United States last November. Starting in January, it began a staggered opening week by week in countries around the world. My colleagues and I, who are portrayed in the film, did not need a schedule to know where or when those openings were. That is because our email spiked every week with each opening, with messages from victims of priests in South Africa, in France, in Italy, in South Korea, in India, in Australia. And those are just a few. One Sunday, I received an email from a 22-year-old Iranian man. He had seen a pirated version of the film, and he wrote to tell me how he had been raped by his mullah when he was 15. Spotlight speaks to us all as journalists, and it speaks for us all. And it does so in a language we all share. It is about what we all do, journalism that makes a difference. It is about reporters like all of you who stare down the most powerful of institutions. And you, not I, take great risks when you do that. It is about overcoming obstacles that often seem impossible to surmount. It is about an undertaking as risky as any news organization could imagine. The consequences for the Boston Globe, if we didn't produce an airtight case or if we got the story wrong, would have been catastrophic. Spotlight is about something else, too. A story that sat on the shelf too long at the Globe and many other newspapers because editors and publishers were too deferential to the Catholic Church. I have not heard that word, deferential, here in Kathmandu, but I have heard a word that sounds a little bit like it: self-censorship. For far too long, the church in America was everyone's most iconic institution. The Cardinal Archbishop in Boston was the most powerful political figure in Boston and in the state of Massachusetts. And for too many years, reporters in Boston and in other cities never asked the tough questions because, well, you didn't ask the Cardinal Archbishop a tough question. I don't mean to say we knew the story was there and we ignored it. We didn't know. No one did. But our guard was down and we missed clues. And every archdiocese in the United States and every archdiocese around the world has one thing in common. They're all within a few miles of a major newspaper. And we all missed this story for too long. So one important lesson among many that we learned from this story: we do our most beloved institutions no favors when we give them a pass. They deserve the same scrutiny that we usually reserve for public agencies and politicians. Recently, I spoke with an editor in a very Catholic city in another country. In his city, there has been no accounting of the abuse by priests. He knows about sexual predators in clerical garb, including one who occupies a prominent position that gives him access to children. But he worries that exposing the abuse will place his news organization in grave jeopardy. In Boston, I said to him, we too were fearful that our stories would create a powerful backlash from the church and from devout Catholics. We even prepared for the likelihood that hundreds of angry protesters would lay siege to the newspaper. But here is what happened when we began publishing our stories. For several days, there was stunned disbelief among Catholics because, frankly, we all found it unimaginable that a church that is supposed to be devoted to children would be mounting an international criminal conspiracy. But that shock quickly turned to anger, and the anger among Catholics was directed at the church. Within 2 weeks, prominent Catholics were calling for the cardinal to resign. We had not a single protester, because it makes no sense to blame the messenger when the message is devastating, convincing, and irrefutable. Our phones were ringing constantly, mostly with calls from victims. But more and more, we began to get calls from conservative Catholics who ordinarily didn't much care for the liberal Boston Globe. They were calling to thank us for exposing crimes that had put their children at risk for many decades. They were empowered by the truth, and a powerful institution that had survived on secrecy, deception, and corruption lost all of its power. Spotlight also represents something for us that is less tangible. It stands for every one of us and the work we do. It is, for many of us, the perfect elixir at just the right moment. It pushes the despair that enshrouds the news business into the background. To put it in a hippie Kathmandu context, it is just the right dose of ecstasy. It is the high from which we don't want to come down. And for many thousands of young journalists and journalism students, it has been an affirming event. If they had doubts, they know there can be no career choice as rewarding as journalism that holds the powerful accountable. Spotlight is also an antidote. It contradicts the widespread public perception, at least in the United States, that journalists in their work are not to be believed, that what we do really doesn't matter, that journalism has no value. It has even led some editors to revisit decisions to stop doing investigative reporting because they had decided it was too expensive. They thought that what we do was a luxury they could no longer afford. They were wrong. Investigative reporting is a necessity we cannot afford to do without. The film is also perhaps a mirage. To some, it is a wistfully nostalgic take, a eulogy perhaps, on journalism as it once was, reporting that is increasingly difficult to do because news organizations are financially imperiled. Of course, there's something to those concerns, but I prefer, as I know you do, to be an optimist. It makes me feel better. It's easier to digest my food and sleep well. My optimism spiked upward last week. I was in Arizona, where I spoke to several hundred students who are bullish on the future of journalism and investigative reporting. And I went on from there to San Diego to help raise money for one of the country's best nonprofit investigative outfits, which performs the principal watchdog role in America's 8th largest city. I was astonished at how many people showed up to contribute money because they care deeply about investigative reporting. Being here with you has energized me even more. I am honored by how welcoming you have been to me. But I also have been a little taken aback that so many of you wanted to meet me. Why me? Believe me when I say this, I am far from the best reporter in any room of my peers, and that certainly includes this room. I am only the luckiest reporter in the room, but only until someone comes along and makes a film about the extraordinarily journalism that some of you are doing. So let me return to Esther, my new friend. Is she here? Thank you. When we met Thursday in this room, before I knew who you were a little awestruck to be talking to me. Am I right? But when I learned who you were, I was more honored to be in your presence than you were to be in mine. I am, in fact, I am in awe of all of you. To me, you are all spotlight reporters for the great journalism you have done and will do, for your energy, for your passion, for your courage, for your tenacity, for your commitment to righting wrong, and for knowing with a certainty that there is no injustice, however grave, that cannot be eradicated by those who unearth the truth. I thank you so very much for your kindness in listening to me.